Abandoned in 1953, she was found 70 years later by a boy who never forgot her. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The last thing little Teresa remembered of her mother was the warmth of a hand slipping from hers and the sound of heels quickly fading down the corridor of the orphanage. It was 1953. She stood frozen at the edge of the room, surrounded by strangers, clutching the sleeve of her sweater with trembling fingers. She was 6. Her mother never came back. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. The orphanage was cold, not just in temperature, but in feeling. The walls were grey, the beds were iron and creaky, and the staff rarely smiled. The older girls teased her because she stuttered. The younger ones were too scared to speak. Teresa withdrew into silence, but one person noticed her. His name was Nico. He didn't talk much, but when others pushed her or called her names, he'd quietly sit beside her. He once gave her half of his bread roll. Another time, he slipped her a note with a badly drawn flower and 2 stick figures holding hands. They never had long conversations, but every time Teresa cried into her pillow, she remembered that quiet kindness. And then he disappeared too, adopted by a family abroad. No warning, no goodbye. Another person vanished from her life. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, Teresa grew up in the shadowed halls of St. Catherine's Orphanage, learning quickly to become invisible. When Sister Margaret shouted, or when the older children sought someone to blame, Teresa made herself small, folding her lanky frame into corners where no one would look. Her stutter became worse whenever attention turned her way, so she spoke less and less until the nuns began to wonder if she could speak at all. At night, she would take out Nico's crumpled note from beneath her thin mattress, tracing the childish lines of the drawing with her fingertip. She wondered if he remembered her in his new life across the ocean, or if she had been easily forgotten like everything else in the orphanage's grim walls. When she turned 12, Teresa was assigned kitchen duties, spending her days peeling potatoes and scrubbing pots under the watchful eye of cook, whose arthritis made her temperament as sharp as the knives hanging above the sink. But even in this drudgery, Teresa found a small pleasure. She could sneak scraps to the stray cats that gathered behind the orphanage, their eyes glowing in the twilight like tiny lanterns of recognition. For Nico, life across the ocean in Chicago unfolded in a world of stark contrasts. His adoptive parents, the Wilsons, were wealthy but distant, providing material comforts while emotionally remaining strangers. Their 3-story brownstone in Lincoln Park felt cavernous after the cramped quarters of the orphanage. His new father, James Wilson, worked long hours as a surgeon at Cook County Hospital, coming home late with shadows under his eyes and little patience for small talk. Eleanor Wilson organized charity events and garden club meetings, dressing Nico in stiff collared shirts for photographs that appeared in local society pages, introducing him as our little Spanish project. School proved another battlefield, as children mocked his accent and mannerisms. Nico's thoughts often wandered back to Spain, to the girl with sad eyes who stuttered when nervous, but had shown him more genuine kindness than anyone in his new home. At night, he would stare out his bedroom window at the twinkling Chicago skyline, wondering if Teresa was looking at the same stars, if she ever thought of him, and if the half of his bread roll had been enough to show her that someone cared. Could a girl with no one to protect her survive in a place that crushed spirits as easily as autumn leaves underfoot? What would become of her without someone to notice when she disappeared into herself? The questions haunted him as he grew into adolescence, shadowing even his brightest moments with an inexplicable sense of unfinished business. When Teresa turned 16, Sister Margaret called her into the administrative office, a room Teresa had always associated with punishment and bad news. "You're of age now," the nun said without preamble, her steel-rimmed glasses catching the weak afternoon light. "We've arranged an apprenticeship with Señor Morales at his tailor shop on Calle, Valencia. You start Monday." No discussion, no choices, just another life decided for her by others. The tailor shop became Teresa's world for the next decade. Señor Morales was gruff but fair, and he didn't mind her silence or occasional stutter caring, only about the precision of her stitches and her willingness to work late. Teresa discovered she had a gift for detailed embroidery, her fingers creating delicate patterns that wealthy women would request specifically. "The quiet girl makes flowers bloom on fabric," they would say, not realizing or caring that she could hear them. As years passed, Teresa's reputation grew. When Señor Morales retired in 1976, he sold the shop to her at a price she could afford through years of careful saving. For the first time, something truly belonged to her. Teresa's alterations and fine embroidery, the sign read in elegant script. Yet each night, she returned to her small apartment above the bakery, alone with her thoughts and the box of memories that remained her most treasured possession. "Will you ever know what became of me, Nico? Will anyone?" Meanwhile, Nico's path led him through the prestigious halls of Northwestern University, where he studied architecture against his father's wishes for medical school. The clean lines and purposeful spaces of buildings spoke to him, how structure could create safety, how design could foster community or isolation. His thesis project, an orphanage designed around principles of warmth and belonging, won university accolades, but drew puzzled responses from his adoptive parents. "Why focus on such a depressing subject?" Eleanor had asked at his graduation. "Honestly, Nicholas, you should be looking toward profitable ventures now." They'd renamed him shortly after his adoption, finding Nico too foreign for their social circle. Only in his private thoughts did he maintain his true name, the one that connected him to his past, to Spain, to her. After university, Nico joined a small architectural firm that specialized in community projects, schools, libraries, affordable housing. His designs always included hidden corners with window seats, small sanctuaries where someone might find a moment's peace, a detail his colleagues found oddly specific but touching. "Everyone needs a place to feel safe," he would explain with a faraway look. At 35, he married Catherine Miller, a kind-hearted librarian who understood his quiet nature and respected the parts of himself he kept private. When she died suddenly 5 years later of an aneurysm, Nico felt himself splitting in two, the successful architect everyone saw and the lost boy who had now lost someone else. The grief swallowed him whole for months, until one night, sorting through old boxes in their, now his, apartment, his fingers brushed against a familiar photograph, the orphanage group photo he'd kept all these years. There in the back row, barely smiling, stood Teresa. Something stirred within him, a purpose perhaps, or a reckoning with unfinished business. What if she was still out there? What if she still wondered if she'd been forgotten? Had anyone ever gone back for her? Life had settled into predictable patterns for Teresa. Each morning, she opened her shop at 8, greeted the same customers, and bent over intricate work that kept her mind occupied and her hands useful. At 65, her fingers had grown stiffer, but her eyesight remained sharp enough for the detailed embroidery that had become her signature. Her hair had long since turned silver, worn in a simple braid down her back. She had few friends, Maria from the bakery below her apartment, who saved her cinnamon rolls on Sundays, Dr. Fuentes, who treated her infrequent illnesses and never rushed her when she struggled to express her symptoms, and young Luisa, who helped in the shop 3 afternoons a week and filled the space with cheerful chatter that required minimal responses. They were kind people, but they knew little of her history, No one knew about the box in her closet or about the little boy who had once made her feel less alone. No one knew that sometimes, in the quiet evenings of her apartment, she would whisper to herself to practice speaking without a stutter, imagining conversations with Nico about all the years that had passed between them. "You remembered me, didn't you?" she would ask his memory, though the hope of an answer had faded decades ago. "Have you ever felt forgotten by someone who once meant everything to you? Have you ever wondered if someone from your past still thinks of you sometimes? If you have, please share your experience in the comments." In his Chicago apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, Nico had begun what his colleagues called his obsession. The dining table disappeared under maps, old records, and correspondence with Spanish administrative offices. At 76, he should have been enjoying retirement, accepting the occasional consulting job, perhaps traveling. Instead, he had become consumed with finding a woman who might no longer be alive, whose last name he had never known, based on childhood memories from over 60 years ago. "This is madness, Nicholas," his friend Martin had said during their weekly chess game. "Even if she's alive, she may not remember you. People romanticize childhood connections." But Nico knew better. Some bonds transcended time and circumstance. Some people imprinted themselves on your soul. He had contacted the orphanage, only to discover it had closed in 1986. Records had been transferred to various administrative offices, many lost or damaged. He hired a Spanish researcher who found a partial list of children from St. Catherine's during the 1950s, but no Teresa appeared. Had he misremembered her name? Had she changed it? Then came a breakthrough. An elderly nun, Sister Clara now, residing in a retirement home in Madrid, had worked at St. Catherine's during that period. Though her memory showed signs of deterioration, certain details remained crystalline in her mind. The girl who stuttered, she recalled during their video call, her rheumy eyes suddenly focusing. Tall, thin child, always hiding. She became a seamstress, stayed in the city. What was her name? Teresa, I believe. Teresa Navarro. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Teresa's apartment as she slowly prepared her tea, joints aching more than usual. 76 years had etched their passage into her body, the slight stoop of her shoulders, the liver spots on her once nimble hands, the careful movements to avoid aggravating her arthritic knee. Today marked a special occasion, though no, one would celebrate it with her, the 70th anniversary of her arrival at St. Catherine's Orphanage. 7 decades since her mother had walked away, 7 decades of building a life from nothing but her own resilience. She opened her shop later on these private anniversaries, allowing herself the rare indulgence of melancholy reflection. She took out her memory box and laid each item on the kitchen table. The worn sweater she'd arrived in, now impossibly small. The group photograph with faces that had blurred in her memory. A newspaper clipping about the orphanage's closing. And, most precious of all, the crumpled drawing of stick figures and a flower. "Silly old woman," she murmured to herself, touching the yellowed paper gently, "still keeping children's drawings at your age." Yet she couldn't bring herself to discard it, this tangible proof that once, however briefly, someone had seen her. When she felt invisible, the bell above her shop door chimed unexpectedly. She must have forgotten to lock it. Sighing, she made her way downstairs, ready to explain she wasn't open yet. A tall, elderly man stood just inside the entrance, silver-haired, and distinguished despite his obviously jet-lagged appearance. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said in Spanish, tinged with an American accent. "I'm looking for Teresa Navarro." Teresa felt her heart stutter in her chest, an echo of her childhood speech impediment manifesting in her pulse. No one had called her by her full name in decades. In the neighborhood, she was simply Senora Navarro, the seamstress with the quiet voice and skillful hands. I'm Teresa Navarro," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady. How can I help you?" The man's face seemed to light up with a mixture of disbelief and joy. "Forgive me," he said. "I'm looking for someone I knew from St. Catherine's orphanage. In the 1950s, the world around Teresa seemed to tilt slightly, past and present colliding with dizzying force. She gripped the counter for support. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, afraid to hope yet unable to stop herself. The man reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a photograph, the same orphanage group photo that lay upstairs on her kitchen table. Then, with hands that trembled slightly with age or emotion, he produced a folded paper, creased and yellowed, with time. She didn't need to see what it contained, she already knew. "My name is Nicholas Wilson now," he said softly. "But once, a long time ago, I was Nico, and you were the girl who kept my drawing." Teresa's vision blurred with tears. 70. Years of loneliness collapsed between them, like a bridge finally connecting two distant shores. "You came back," she whispered, hardly believing the words even as they left her lips. Will he remember the promise he never actually made? Will this chance encounter heal decades of emptiness for both of them? What happens when two souls reconnect, after an entire lifetime apart? The next weeks passed in a dreamlike haze for Teresa. Nico, though he answered to Nicholas now, had taken a room at the small hotel around the corner. Each day after she closed the shop, they would meet for dinner at local cafes or walk slowly through the tree-lined streets of Barcelona, piecing together the separate puzzles of their lives. Nico told her about Chicago, his architectural career, his brief marriage to Catherine, and the persistent memory that had finally driven him across the ocean in his twilight years. "Something was always unfinished," he explained, as they sat on a park bench, feeding crumbs to strutting pigeons. "When Catherine died, I realized how quickly life can end with things left unsaid. I couldn't bear the thought of never knowing what became of you." Teresa shared her own story, the years at the orphanage after he left, her apprenticeship with Señor Morales, building her modest business and reputation. She spoke more than she had in years, her childhood stutter occasionally resurfacing. When emotions ran high, but Nico waited patiently, never finishing her sentences or showing impatience. "I kept your drawing," she admitted one evening as they shared paella near the harbor. "It was silly, perhaps, but it reminded me that once someone had noticed me." Nico's eyes, still bright blue despite his advanced age, grew moist. "I noticed you then," he said, reaching across the table to cover her weathered hand with his own, "and I see you now." The shop had never been closed for so long, but Teresa found she didn't miss it. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing the city as a tourist, seeing familiar streets through new eyes as Nico marveled at Gothic architecture and hidden plazas she had passed thousands of times without truly noticing. They visited the site where St. Catherine's had stood before being demolished in the 1990s, now an apartment complex with a small commemorative plaque, the only evidence of its former purpose. Standing there, Teresa felt a strange sense of closure, the ghosts of her childhood finally laid to rest by Nico's presence beside her. "Do you ever wonder about her?" Nico asked quietly. "Your mother?" Teresa considered the question. For decades, she had pushed away thoughts of the woman whose abandonment had shaped her entire existence. "I used to," she admitted. "I imagined she had a good reason, that she suffered for leaving me. Later, I imagined confronting her, demanding explanations. Now, I mostly hope she found some peace." Nico nodded, understanding in his gaze. "That's grace," he said simply. "Something I've struggled to find." He told her then about his adoptive parents, their emotional distance, the sense of being a project rather than a child. "I spent years angry at them for not loving me as I needed," he confessed. "Only in my 50s did I realize they gave what they could. It wasn't enough, but it was all they knew how to give. As twilight descended over Barcelona, they walked arm in arm back toward Teresa's apartment. Two people who had carried parallel wounds, now finding strength in shared understanding. Nico extended his stay once, then again, until it became clear to both of them that something more permanent was taking shape between them. Not romance, they were too old for such youthful notions, but a companionship that filled empty spaces neither had fully acknowledged before. "I could get a small apartment nearby," Nico suggested one Sunday afternoon as they sorted through fabrics in Teresa's shop, which she had reopened with his help 3 mornings a week. "Chicago has nothing pulling me back now." The idea both thrilled and terrified Teresa. Decades of solitude had formed habits that would be difficult to break. "What if," she began, the old stutter threatening to return. "What if we disappoint each other? What if the children we remember become lost in the old people we've become?" Nico considered her words carefully, respecting the fear behind them. "We might," he acknowledged, "but I'd rather risk disappointment than certainty of regret. I've had enough regrets." That evening, as they shared tea in her apartment, Nico occupying the chair that had stood empty for years across from hers, he asked the question that had driven him across an ocean. "All these years, did you ever wonder if anyone remembered? You? If I remembered?" Teresa felt tears spring to her eyes. "Every birthday," she admitted, "I would take out your drawing and ask that very question." Nico's smile held 70 years of certainty. "I never forgot. Not for a single day." On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after Nico had appeared in her shop doorway, Teresa stood nervously on the steps of Barcelona's civil registry office. Beside her, Nico looked distinguished in a new suit, his silver hair catching the morning light. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, her hand trembling slightly in his steady grip. At 77 years old, they were about to become legal companions, not married in the traditional sense, but bound in a civil union that would ensure neither would face decisions or hardships alone in their remaining years. "I've never been more certain of anything," Nico replied, the architectural precision of his mind having mapped out their future with careful consideration. They had already made practical arrangements. Nico had sold his Chicago apartment and moved permanently into the small flat above Teresa's shop. The rooms had been rearranged to accommodate his books and the few treasured possessions he couldn't bear to part with. Teresa had cleared decades of accumulated solitude to make space for this unexpected chapter. The ceremony was brief, witnessed only by Maria from the bakery and Nico's Chicago friend Martin, who had flown in for the occasion. No grand reception followed, just lunch at their favorite cafe and a walk through the park where schoolchildren played, oblivious to the extraordinary journey that had brought these two elderly people to share an ice cream bench in the afternoon. "Son, 70 years, Teresa mused as they watched the children. Most people don't wait that long for their happy ending. Nico squeezed her hand gently. "Perhaps it's not an ending at all," he suggested. "Perhaps it's just the beginning of the story we were always meant to share." In the years that followed, Teresa and Nico created a rhythm of life that honored both their individual needs and their newfound companionship. They maintained separate bedrooms, concessions to age and lifelong habits, but shared breakfast each morning and dinner each evening, filling the hours between with a comfortable blend of togetherness and solitude. Teresa continued her shop work 3 mornings a week, while Nico volunteered with a local architectural preservation society, his experienced eye valued in their efforts to protect Barcelona's historical buildings. They traveled modestly, to Madrid, to Valencia, once even returning to the small coastal town where St. Catherine's records indicated Teresa had been born, though no family connections remained to be discovered. Each night, they would sit on Their small balcony overlooking the street, sometimes in conversation, sometimes in comfortable silence, two people who had discovered that belonging could come at any age. On Teresa's 80th birthday, Nico presented her with a leather-bound sketchbook filled with drawings, the orphanage as he remembered it, the Chicago skyline of his youth. Teresa bent over her embroidery, their shared apartment rendered in loving detail. "I kept drawing," he explained somewhat bashfully. "All these years, I kept practicing because of how you treasured that first crude attempt." Teresa traced the skillful lines, seeing their shared history through his eyes. "We were never truly abandoned, were we?" she said softly. "Just waiting to find our way back to each other." Nico's eyes crinkled with emotion. "The longest detour in history," he agreed, "but we arrived exactly where we were supposed to be." As they entered their mid-80s, both Teresa and Nico faced the inevitable physical challenges of advanced age. Nico's heart condition required more frequent monitoring. Teresa's arthritis made embroidery increasingly difficult. They finally closed the shop, converting the space into a small gallery where her finest pieces were displayed alongside Nico's architectural drawings and sketches. A visual testament to two lives lived with quiet creativity. Young artists from the community sometimes gathered there for informal workshops that the elderly couple hosted, Teresa teaching textile arts while Nico shared architectural principles. "We've become the grandparents we never had," Nico observed one evening as they watched the last students depart. Teresa nodded, thinking of all the children at St. Catherine's, wondering how many had found such peace in their final chapters. Their most precious moments came in the small hours. When pain or insomnia drove one from bed, the other would inevitably sense the absence and follow, meeting in the kitchen for herbal tea and quiet companionship. During one such night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Teresa confessed her deepest fear. "I'm afraid of being the one left behind again." Nico, understanding the weight of her childhood abandonment, made no false promises about defying mortality. Instead, he simply said, "Wherever I am, I'll be holding our story, and wherever you are, you'll hold it too. Some bonds can't be broken, not by distance, not by time, not even by whatever comes after this life." In those words, Teresa found a comfort that 70 years of solitude had never offered, the knowledge that being remembered is perhaps the truest form of never being left behind. On their 10th anniversary as companions, a letter arrived from Chicago. Nico's old architecture firm had established a scholarship in his name, funding education for children from foster care and orphanages who showed interest in design and building. "They want us to come for the ceremony," Nico said, his voice wavering with emotion. Though travel had become more challenging as they approached their 90s, they agreed this journey was important. The flight across the Atlantic taxed their strength, but seeing the faces of the first 3 scholarship recipients, teenagers with serious eyes and determined expressions that reminded them of their own younger selves, made every uncomfortable moment worthwhile. During the small reception, one of Nico's former colleagues raised a toast. "To Nicholas Wilson, who taught us that the most important element in any structure is the space it creates for human connection." Later, in their hotel room, as Teresa helped Nico with his medication, he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what truly matters at the end of a life. It's not the buildings I designed or even the career I built. It's the moments of seeing and being seen, like when a boy with nothing to give shared his bread with a girl who needed to know she wasn't invisible." Teresa's eyes filled with tears. "That half a bread roll sustained me for 70 years, she admitted. "The knowing that someone had noticed sustained me when nothing else would have." They held each other then, fragile bodies housing resilient hearts, understanding that the greatest architecture of their lives was the bridge they had built across decades of separation. "Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.